Hello. Thanks for listening to the 15th episode of The Bible and You. This program is focused on the study of God's holy word without the burden of any preconceived dogma or denominational doctrine. Today, I will continue in a series of episodes dealing with the identification of the beast of the book of Revelation, usually called the Antichrist. In episode 14, we studied the short reign of Antiochus the Fourth, who called himself Epiphanes, meaning God among us. Our studies came from secular history and the non-canonical books of the Maccabees, and I told you that Antiochus the Fourth was not mentioned by name in the Bible. However, I do believe that the Bible makes several references to this despotic ruler of the Seleucid Empire, and I want to devote this episode to finding some of those references. If you haven't listened to episode 14 of The Bible and You, I would encourage you to do so before continuing with this one. I'm beginning in the 10th chapter of the book of Daniel, where we will get another look into the future. However, this prophecy doesn't have its roots in a dream like so many of Daniel's prophecies. Listen to verses 4 through 6 from the King James Version. And in the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel, then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. So Daniel is wide awake and is visited by this magnificent being. The being goes on to explain that he was sent to tell Daniel about the future. In verse 14, the being, I believe he was an angel of God, tells Daniel, "Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days." Clearly, the angel is going to describe events that are in the future and take place over a long period of time. The actual prophecy begins in chapter 11, verses 2 through 4, which say, "And now I will show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up against the realm of Grecia. And a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others besides those." Well, if you've been studying along with me for the last 3 episodes, this should ring a bell. It's talking about Persia and Greece and their respective rulers and about war between them. Or if you are a student of ancient history, you should immediately recognize the conquering of Persia by Alexander the Great of Macedonia and the founder of the Greco-Macedonian Empire. Verse 4 continues the story that we have already studied of how Alexander died and his empire was divided among 4 of his generals. Now listen to verse 5, which jumps forward to the time when the successors to Alexander had fought until only the Seleucid and Ptolemaic divisions survived. "And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. And in the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. Here we have the first biblical use of the terms King of the North and King of the South, and they almost certainly refer to the respective leaders of the Seleucid and Ptolemaic empires. That is, the King of the North refers to the Seleucid king, and the King of the South refers to the Ptolemaic king, a fact which will become increasingly important in our study. In truth, a careful reading of Daniel 11 makes it clear that the entire chapter is devoted to the story of the Seleucid line of kings and their dealings with the Ptolemaic kings and their successors. If you recall from episode 14, there were 7 Seleucid kings prior to Antiochus the Fourth. They were Seleucus Nicator, the founder of the empire, Antiochus the First, Antiochus the Second, Seleucus II, Seleucus III, Antiochus III, who was also called Antiochus the Great, and Seleucus the Fourth. If you printed the chart of the Seleucid kings, it will help you to keep up who's who and when they reigned. If you don't have it, go to the description of this episode, click on the link that says Seleucid Kings. To be honest, it is very difficult for me in verses 6 through 19 to tell exactly which of these Seleucid kings is being described, but it is much easier beginning in verse 20. Remember that at the death of Antiochus III, the throne was assumed by his son Seleucus the Fourth. King Seleucus IV was not a happy king, because he was forced to spend most of his energy collecting taxes in order to pay the annual ransom payments due to Rome. History tells us that Seleucus IV was primarily known for his determined and often unscrupulous tax-raising schemes. After only 7 years on the throne, he was poisoned by his treasurer, Heliodorus. Now if we go back to Daniel 11, verse 20 reads, "Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom, but within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle." That seems to exactly describe Seleucus IV, the immediate predecessor of Antiochus the Fourth. In verse 21, the angel tells us, "And in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries." That is from the King James Version. Other translations use intrigue or fraud in place of flatteries. Antiochus IV took the throne of the Seleucid Empire as a usurper. Although he was a son of Antiochus III, he was not next in line to inherit the throne. As you may recall, after Heliodorus poisoned Seleucus IV, he put the dead king's young son on the throne, but it was actually Heliodorus who wielded the power. In addition, this young son of Seleucus IV was not the rightful heir to the throne. His older brother, Demetrius, was actually next in line. But recognizing a good idea when he saw one, Antiochus IV took control of the empire by appointing himself co-regent with the young son of Seleucus IV, and he murdered the child soon thereafter. Thus, Antiochus IV and the way he ascended the throne fits well with the description of the king described in Daniel 11:21. And even though he is not identified by name, I believe this vile person is none other than Antiochus IV. As one continues reading verses 22 through 30 of Daniel 11, there are some reminders of Antiochus Epiphanes, but some of those references are not perfectly clear. But in verse 31, we're brought directly back on topic. "And arms shall stand on his part," speaking of the king of the north, "and that is they, his forces, shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate." I don't think there can be a mistake there. The king of the north described in Daniel is none other than Antiochus the Fourth, also known as Antiochus Epiphanes, and sometimes referred to as Antiochus Epimanes, the madman. History is clear that it was he and his forces that entered Jerusalem, killed all the men, and seized all the women and children to be sold into slavery. The troops pillaged the city, tore down its walls, and built a fortress on a hilltop. On the orders of Antiochus the Fourth, they stopped the daily temple sacrifices and prohibited the worship of God Almighty in any public way. Jews were forced to eat the meat of unclean animals. Men and boys were skinned and cooked alive for not renouncing the true God. Mothers were murdered for allowing their children to be circumcised, and the children were hung. The ultimate desecration came in 167 BC when Antiochus the Fourth erected an idol in the temple and had pigs sacrificed before it. Listen to verse 31 again. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Could history and the scriptures be any more in agreement? I don't see how. Well, my goal to this point has been to convince you that the king of the north referred to in Daniel 11, at least through verse 31, was Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. If you're still not convinced, then the rest of what I have to say won't make much sense to you. But if you do see it as I do, the remainder of this episode will answer some important questions and raise some others. Continuing now with verse 36 and following. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver, and with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange god, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. Wait a minute, you say. I don't remember any of that in the life of Antiochus the Fourth. Maybe it's not the same person. That's an excellent observation, and one that has troubled many Bible students. It deserves some serious consideration. Just who is the king of the north in the remainder of Daniel 11? Many well-respected scholars and authors have tried to deal with this question. For example, Walter K. Price, author of a book entitled In the Final Days, and one well-versed in both the scriptures and the history of that period, believes that the last reference to Antiochus the Fourth is in Daniel 11, verse 35. Price wrote the following. With Daniel 11:36, an additional question emerges. Is Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes still the subject of these verses? Does Daniel 11:36 through 39 characterize King Antiochus? If so, then this portrayal of him cannot be substantiated by the ancient sources which have so concisely verified the preceding verses. Furthermore, the events of Daniel 11:40 through 45 are absolutely impossible to apply to the final days of King Antiochus, for he did not die in Judea between the coast and Jerusalem as a result of renewed hostilities with Egypt, the way the verses would indicate if they were applied to him. It is a fact of history that Antiochus died in Persia about 164 BC. That's the end of the quote from Price's book. Of course, this is true. We know full well that Antiochus the Fourth died in Persia after falling from his chariot. Mr. Price also uses verse 36 as proof that the prophecy of Antiochus the Fourth ends with verse 35, which says in part, "And he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god." Price reasons, Antiochus the Fourth, Epiphanes, claimed to be God manifest, yet paradoxically he was a religious person who revered deity other than himself. Apparently he was an Epicurean in religious matters. There is some evidence that Antiochus was influenced by demonic powers also. Again, Price is right. Antiochus, as the little horn, did worship the Greek gods and tried to force the Jews to do so. Yet Daniel 11:36 says he will magnify himself above all gods. So what's the solution? Well, before I can address that issue, I want to cover another matter. Up to now in our study, I have promised repeatedly that I would tell you what I believe to be the identity of the Antichrist, but I haven't yet done so. I wanted to first explain some of the historical and biblical background that supports my belief, and now I think I have done that. From here forward, however, I will be dealing with events that are yet in our future, events that are prophesied by Daniel, by John the Revelator, and by other authors of the Holy Scriptures. In order to better discuss these prophecies, it is necessary that I reveal my personal belief of the identity of the Antichrist. So here it is. I believe that the man that the Scriptures variously call the man of sin, the son of perdition, the beast, and the Antichrist is none other than a resurrected Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. And I believe that belief is supported by history and prophecy. As we have studied, when Antiochus the Fourth was first on this earth, he was a vain, petty man, a usurper who was never entitled to be king. He was often foolish to the point of clownish in his behavior, and yet possessed the capacity for extreme cruelty and oppression. He was, in my opinion, a tyrant in training, in effect practicing for his role in the end of days when he will again appear, not as a small-time despot, but as a satanically controlled and motivated beast who will first appear as an angel of light, but will ultimately woo, deceive, and betray almost every human on the face of the earth. If my belief is correct, then the mystery of Daniel chapter 11 verses 21 through 45 is no longer where they change from referring to the little horn to referring to the Antichrist, but rather where they change from describing the past to describing the future. Verse 40 helps to answer that concern. "And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over." So we see that it is the same man, just at a different time, that is, at the time of the end. Thus, we know that there is a change in time of the events described in Daniel 11, and the change takes place somewhere between verse 31, which speaks of the abomination that maketh desolate, and verse 40, which clearly defines the time as yet in our future. Where exactly is the dividing line in the prophecy between what has already happened and what is yet in the future, you may ask? Honestly, I don't know, and I don't think anyone can be positive, but my opinion is that the change takes place with verse 31. I believe that everything after that refers to the activities of a king of the north who is yet in the future. While we're on the subject of placing events in the proper time in which they occur, let's make a quick detour to Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus himself takes on the role of prophet. The disciples were just as curious, maybe more so, about the end of the world as we are today, and they asked Jesus in verse 3, "Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world. Jesus proceeded to describe the situation that would exist leading up to the Great Tribulation. He spoke of wars, of the persecution of his followers, about false prophets, and the decrease of love in the world. He warned his followers of that day and of every day thereafter to be watchful for the signs that would lead to the end. And he described a pivotal event in verses 15 and 16 of Matthew 24. When ye therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Thus, no less an authority than Jesus Christ himself prophesied that an event, the ultimate desecration of the temple, which had already been perpetrated some 200 years earlier by Antiochus the Fourth, would happen in the end time. Was Jesus' memory bad? Or was he mixed up on the timing? How could he state that something that had clearly already happened and was well known to all the Jews was still in the future? The obvious answer is that two such occurrences were to happen. One that took place at the hands of Antiochus Epiphanes in 167 BC, and another which had not yet taken place in the time when Jesus was on the earth, and which has still not taken place even in our time. I personally believe that the repetition of this horror will include more similarities than just the act itself, but we're not there yet. If you haven't read Matthew chapter 24 recently, I hope you will. It is one of the most amazing chapters in the Bible and well worth your time. Some of you may recall from episode 12 of this program when I discussed Daniel's vision of the ram with two horns being pushed from power by the goat with one notable horn. That's described in Daniel chapter 8 verses 3 through 12. But Daniel himself didn't understand the vision until an angel explained it to him in verses 17 through 22. According to the angel, the vision describes the defeat of Medo-Persia by Alexander the Great and the subsequent divisions of the Greco-Macedonian Empire into 4 parts. But the angel didn't stop there. Listen to verses 23 through 25. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper, and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and holy people. And through his policy also he will cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. I'm sure that most of you have no trouble identifying who this king of fierce countenance refers to. Clearly, it is the subject of our current study, the beast, the Antichrist himself. We will come back to these verses in a future episode, but there is a point that I want to make now. There is a clear break in time between verse 22 and verse 23. The earlier verses tell of events which have already happened, that is, the conquering of Medo-Persia by Alexander. The latter verses unmistakably describe the coming of the Antichrist in the end times, which are yet in our future. And as if to eliminate any doubt of this break in time, the angel had already told Daniel in verse 19, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the appointed time the end shall be. To make my belief absolutely clear, I believe verse 31 of Daniel 11, which says, "And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate," applies to both the past and the future, having been acted out once under the command of the little horn, and yet destined to be reenacted in the last days by the army of the Antichrist. Verses 32 through 35 could apply to either period or maybe both, but verses 36 and following are absolutely yet in the future. Let's read them again with that in mind. "And the king," that is, the king of the north, "shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain." Suppose for just a moment that I'm right, and this small man, Antiochus the Fourth, who had actually lived such a despicable life and died an ignominious death, were to suddenly find himself alive once again. That alone would certainly inflate his ego, but receiving the support of Satan could easily cause Antiochus to, quote, "magnify himself above all," end of quote, and see himself as a god. This possibility does not seem so unreasonable when we understand his miraculous journey from the 2nd century BC down to the end of days, whenever they come. And we know that Satan loves to imitate Almighty God, so what better charade could he perpetrate than to present his own, quote, "son, Antiochus the Fourth, risen from the dead"? But to be fair, I must report that there is another opinion held by some writers who contend that Antiochus the Fourth was only a symbol or prototype of the beast of the end of days. Yet this belief raised a question in Rollin's mind. He wondered why prophecy would allot so much attention and space to Antiochus and ignore so many far greater ancient kings. These are Rollin's words. "It is impossible for us, whilst we are reading this prophecy, not to be prodigiously struck when we see the justness and accuracy with which the prophet traces the principal characteristics of a king whose history is so much blended with that of the Jews. And we perceive evidently that for this reason the Holy Spirit, either entirely omitting or taking only a transient notice of the actions of other much more famous princes, dwells so long on those of Antiochus Epiphanes." Rollin's doubts are justified. The exploits of Antiochus the Fourth during his first day on this earth were notable, but they alone do not justify the space allocated to him in the Scriptures. I believe the Holy Spirit took into account Antiochus Epiphanes' appearance during the final days and caused Daniel to devote so much space to him in chapter 11. So if a resurrected Antiochus the Fourth is going to be the head of the fourth kingdom, what kingdom will that be? The Scriptures don't directly tell us, so we are primarily left with speculation that hopefully is based on knowledge and reason. Could it be Rome, as so many people think? not likely. We should remember that it was Rome that so frustrated Antiochus during his first stay on earth. It was Rome that held him hostage during much of his early life. It was Rome that prevented him from conquering Egypt and reuniting most of Alexander's empire. Rome, to me, seems out of the question. Throughout Daniel 11, Antiochus the Fourth is referred to as the King of the North, regardless of whether the reference is to events during his first stay on earth or to events still in the future. Do you recall that the North refers to the northern part of the empire built by Alexander the Great? And do you recall that Alexander was the son of Philip of Macedon? It seems most likely to me that the resurrected Antiochus will again be the king of the same kingdom that includes the territory that he ruled before Christ, that is, the Macedonian Empire. And Daniel chapter 8 gives us some insight into that as well. Notice the beginning of verse 23, which says, "And in the latter time of their kingdom." Now I ask you, whose kingdom is being referred to there? Who are they? Remember that when Alexander died, his kingdom was divided among his 4 top generals. Now look back to verse 22. Could it be any plainer that the kingdom that is being described is the Greco-Macedonian kingdom? And what does verse 23 say is going to happen in the latter time of the Greco-Macedonian kingdom? Well, of course, it says that a king of fierce countenance, the Antichrist, I believe, will stand up. I don't see how anyone could read this and still think that the kingdom of the Antichrist could be Rome or any kingdom other than a reborn Greco-Macedonian empire. But you say, Macedonia doesn't even exist anymore, does it? Well, maybe you'd be surprised to know that Macedonia is very much still in existence. The Macedonian Kingdom was essentially founded by Philip II when he united Upper and Lower Macedon. And as we have discussed, Philip's son, Alexander the Great, greatly extended the empire. But after his death, the empire fell apart and Macedonia was dominated by one outside group after another for the next 2,000 years. In modern times, Macedonia became part of Yugoslavia and was occupied by Germany during World War II, and then by the Soviet Union as part of the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia. But in 1991, Macedonia peacefully seceded from Yugoslavia and became once again the Republic of Macedonia, a sovereign nation. It is possible that historians of the future may well see this event as being as important as the reestablishment of Israel in 1947 in setting the stage for the end of days. Macedonia is situated north of Greece between Bulgaria, Serbia, Kosovo, and Albania. The entire region is known as the Balkan Peninsula and has always been a hotbed of political and religious turmoil, a situation which I believe will continue to the very end. I also think Antiochus the Fourth will first reappear out of modern-day Macedonia as a minor character from a small country, but he will rapidly rise to world prominence, eventually to world leadership, and ultimately to world dominance. It seems unlikely that he will first appear as Antiochus the Fourth, but rather under a much more obscure persona, saving the revealing of his true identity for a much more focused purpose, which we will study in a future episode. And yes, I'm well aware of what the angel told Daniel after giving him the prophecy described in chapter 12. And I quote, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the end of time." That's Daniel 12:9. Thus, I readily admit that my belief is primarily speculation, and time will reveal the truth. In the meantime, I'm watching the little Republic of Macedonia very closely for clues and for the appearance of the one who could become the Antichrist, the resurrected Antiochus the Fourth, to no longer be a little horn, but rather to become the beast. At this point, I should also state that I did not do the countless hours of research and study to arrive at this belief. The hard work was done by my good friend and mentor, Billy M. Gooch, a man who possesses the rare combination of faith, intellect, and diligence necessary to unravel some of the greatest mysteries of the Bible. Next time on The Bible and You, we'll move into the revelation of the Apostle John and correlate much of what we find there with what we have previously discussed about the Antichrist. In the meantime, I would be grateful if you would pray that the Creator God will guide me in this program and that nothing that I say will detract from His glory. All mistakes are mine and not His. Thanks for listening. And until the next time on The Bible and You, may God bless you and keep you in His will. And don't forget to study your Bible, to pray, and to reach your own conclusions. Don't take my word for anything.